Welcome to this webinar of the outcome harvesting community. My name is Carmen Wilson Grau. I will be your facilitator today. I'm an independent consultant. I'm based in Guatemala and I'm specialized in outcome harvesting. And I am also one of the outcome harvesting community facilitators together with Hule and Connie. Hule, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Carmen. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. Just like Carmen, I'm an independent consultant, but I'm based in Belgium, also specialized in outcome harvesting, and one of the outcome harvesting community facilitators together with Carmen and Connie. Connie, over to you.
Thanks, Hula. Hi, my name is Connie, based in the Netherlands, and similar to my colleagues Carmen and Hula, independent consultant specializing in outcome harvesting and facilitating the community together.
Thank you, Connie. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, as an OH community, we started organizing these webinars in 2020, and we have had a variety of topics of webinars related to the use of outcome harvesting. You can check our website for previous webinars, which were recorded, and also for future webinars coming up. And if you have an interesting outcome harvesting case that you would like to share, please reach out to us either through the website or we can share our email in the chat. For today, we kindly would like to ask you to keep yourselves muted during the presentations and keep your camera off. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to write them in the chat. And we will address them during several Q&A moments that we have. The webinar is being recorded and it will be made available to the outcome harvesting community members and on our website. So today's webinar is actually from one of the panels that was presented at the AEA conference last year. The presenters will share two-pack cases, of outcome harvesting tailoring, and one case from Oxfam NoWIP that will highlight how they tailored outcome harvesting to address donors' concerns about bias in the method. In addition, we will also share a prototype of a substantiation tool for outcome harvesting practitioners to request for your feedback both today and after this webinar. So I'm pleased to welcome our three presenters of today. Lauren Serp, she is Technical Director of the Global Learning Evidence and Impact Team at PACT. Chia Turatun, who is the Senior M&E Officer of Achieve PACT. And Karen Bisbrook, who is Male Team Lead at Oxfam NoWIP. So I'll hand it over to our first presenter, Lauren.
Thanks, Carmen, and thanks to everyone for being here. So we are excited to share with you our presentation from the American Evaluation Association conference last year. Next slide, Carmen, please. So what I will, sorry, we can pass through these. These are the welcome ones. For my presentation, we are going to talk about a study that we conducted at PACT to reflect on the way that we've tailored outcome harvesting at PACT and whether we considered it good or less good practice. Next slide, please. So just briefly, PACT is an international development organization. You can read more about PACT here at pactworld.org, and we work in these areas listed here on the right-hand side if you would like to know more about us. Next slide, please. So for the case study review, what we did is we had a study question where we wanted to know how did we tailor outcome harvesting exactly, what worked well and why, and we did this in light of the principles of outcome harvesting. That's how we made the judgment whether there was what we considered an okay practice or maybe a less good practice. Next slide, please. So most of you know this tree. This tree here. You've seen this before. This is just a great visual that shows the process and content principles of outcome harvesting, where the roots of the tree are the principles of the method, and the steps are what give the branches and the leaves of the tree. So this will come into play later when we present some of our findings from our case study review. Next slide, please. So the study briefly, what we did is we looked at 10 cases of outcome harvesting usage at PACT. You will hear from two of these cases in depth in this presentation, one from Cha and one from myself again, but on behalf of my colleague Tripti, who is on an airplane right now. This is just to say that this shows the depth of the study and the span of the countries and types of projects that we included in the study. Next slide, please. So what did we find? When we evaluated each of these steps, what we're going to present on the next few slides is each of the steps and what we found our tailoring was considered a good practice or a less good practice. So of course there's limitations to these findings. It's a case study review, but we have intended to use these findings to improve our practice and give better guidance to our colleagues at PACT. So that's what I will show on the next few slides, starting with this slide here. So in terms of step one design, some of the best practices or good practices that we found were when we were, of course, co-designing evaluation questions with partners. We incorporated these consultations to existing meetings that we had with them, so it wasn't an extra step. We gave them thorough sensitization to the method, and we also designed the analytical framework at this stage. Those were good practices. It was less successful in design when we don't include our local partner organizations in the design, when we don't have a very specific evaluation question versus a broad, when we had a broad evaluation question, it wasn't always as successful, but it's not always necessarily bad. We'll say more about this later. In step two, another good practices listed here, you'll see obviously piloting questionnaire, prepping partners to come to workshops with outcomes. That's an example that in Tripti's presentation that I will give, we'll talk about where it was really highly participatory with local partner organizations at that stage. And a less good practice is when we've used virtual and in-person workshops and individual meetings with partners and collective workshops. It was just, it was overkill. Next slide, please. In terms of step three, engaging informants, so this is the more iterative portion of articulating outcomes. Some of our good practices that we identified were when we have the change agents do the back and forth iterative part, crafting the outcome statements. We've done this in a workshop setting, which has worked well. Again, this depends on your specific case. Putting very specific prompts in the questionnaire data collection tool and breaking it apart has helped us get better and more complete outcome statements. A less good practice that we've done in engaging informants is when we've limited the number of outcomes we collect from each change agent. We've done this to fit into a variety of constraints, but that has sometimes not always led to the best outcome. I'm going to speed up a bit. So substantiation, best practices, good practices of when we've had a very clear process for justifying the reason for including a substantiator and the process that we used for substantiation. A less good practice is we thought it's been a bit of overkill when substantiating all outcomes. Again, we'll talk more about this. Karen's presentation covers this, and also when we talk about the tool, we're hoping to address that sometimes lack of clarification on how many outcomes to use in substantiation. Next slide, please. We've had some success in terms of analyzing and interpreting the data where we have used some techniques of visualizing outcomes along the theory of change. We've given a presentation on this at EES and AEA before and had a lot of good participation. In terms of, and then like I mentioned earlier, a less good practice is just not having that analytic framework at the beginning. And then supporting use of findings. Another success here has been when we hold a learning event with project partners, and a less good practice obviously is putting a report in a drawer and not using it. The next slide is my final slide, I believe. So again, I think you could just click through some of these visuals come up. Sorry, Carmen, I forgot about this. So what are our recommended improvements when tailoring outcome harvesting based on what we thought we've considered good and less good practices? So in can you click, Carmen? So I think stuff will appear on the screen for people to see. There we go. In step 2 or later, we've said to try to consult other data sources for triangulation. Again, especially if substantiation is difficult, you often will may already have existing data to do some of that substantiation. So it doesn't always need to be with a person. In step 4, substantiation, remember to have a clear justification for why you're picking certain outcomes to be substantiated, and to remember embodying the principles of having credible enough outcomes. And that is the goal of substantiation, and keeping that in mind when doing that step. In terms of it, sorry, 2 minutes?
No, time is up,
Oh,
Lauren.
time is up. Okay, thanks. Can you just click a few more? Some of our other, and everyone will have these slides to see, but these are, I mentioned these already basically in talking about our good and less good practices of tailoring. This is all summarized on one slide, and it shows where the recommendations we made for when you're making decisions on tailoring the method, and things to keep in mind to stay true to the principles of the method. That is it for this presentation. Thank you.
Thank
and then
you.
I believe I'm next again.
Yes, yes. So I'll hand it over to you again. Go ahead.
Sorry you're hearing me talk so much, but the next slide, as I said, this is Tripti Pandey's presentation. This is going in depth into one of the cases that we analyzed as part of that study. This is for our women's empowerment program in Cambodia, funded by USAID. And we want to talk a little bit about where we, again, in depth, saw good and less good practices and when we tailored the method. So Tripti is sorry she can't be here, but I will present on her behalf. Next slide, please. This first slide just shows an overview of the project. Again, this is a project in Cambodia. The goal was to empower women and youth to access their civic and socioeconomic rights. So we had a number of local partner organizations with which we were working through in collaboration on this project. Next slide, please. So there were a certain set of criteria that the program knew they had to take into consideration when conducting outcome harvesting. They knew that they had to conduct a light touch, quote unquote, light touch version of outcome harvesting due to resource constraints, but they really weren't sure at what point they were, I guess, tailoring too much. So the criteria that they had, outcome harvesting was being conducted at end line only. So this would also be used as a complementary method to outcome mapping and most significant change rather than using it standalone. So this is just some of the things to keep in mind when we're presenting this. And the team wanted to reduce the burden on partners, local partner organizations, on collecting data. They had been consulted a lot for data. So to facilitate this, the team customized the outcome statement form to reduce the questions that were only most important for analysis. And I'll show those on the next slide. And the WEAC team also redeveloped outcomes and sent back to partners for review, since many partners had difficulty in formulating these statements. So next slide, please. So overall, through this process, they originally collected 300 outcome statements that were developed by partners. However, after reviewing them, most of them were determined to be more of output level and very few were outcome. So the PACT WEAC team revised these statements using the collection form, and in the end, they came to about 10 to 12 statements, which were actually considered outcome level, and then they decided to substantiate all of those. The partners were asked to provide names of beneficiaries to substantiate the outcomes, and who would know the most about those outcomes. And so that was their process. This on the right-hand side of the slide shows just the streamlined points that were asked in that data collection form. So pretty much the standard questions that would be asked when asking to formulate outcome statements. Next slide, please. So this experience with the WEAC team led to various lessons learned. Primarily in the future, the team would use, they wanted to continue using this table here as a way to sort of break up the components of this outcome statements when collecting them for partners, because they had, as we said, a really difficult time developing them at first without sort of breaking this up. Secondly, they concluded that it was important that they integrated outcome harvesting into pre-existing meeting with partners where they would already be present. It'd be easier to engage with them and doesn't make it an extra task. And finally, one of the main lessons learned was that they felt like they did a good job of using outcome harvesting to complement the other methods they were using, outcome mapping and most significant change. And in terms of improving for the future, the program said that they would dedicate at least a half a day to developing the outcome statements with partners. And part of that would be building their capacity in not just the specifics of the method, but what the whole purpose of this process is, so they would better understand that and could better formulate outcome statements. They will enable more time to discuss the statements during these meetings rather than waiting to discuss them later, like how we had to send them back to them and engage with them sort of asynchronously. They would also ensure that the substantiators are aware of the outcome harvesting exercise. So in this case, the substantiators were the beneficiaries themselves. And they knew that the outcomes had occurred, but they didn't remember the partner names and things of that nature. So it took a little bit more of probing with them to get more information about the outcomes and to validate some of the statements. So that hopefully made up for some of the time I took over in my previous presentation. That is it for this presentation. Thank
You're
you.
perfect.
Thank you, Lauren. I'll hand it over to Cha, and just for those who joined us late, we'll have some Q&A time after all presentations. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Over to you, Cha.
Thanks, Carmen. Hello, everyone. My name is Chotora Thong, Chief Senior Admin Officer at PAT. Good to be with you all today. Next, please. So as a lead harvester in implementing outcome harvesting OH for the project in Zambia, I'm going to review some of our pains and gain with the outcome harvesting. So Achieve is a USA-funded global project to reach and sustain HIV epidemic control among vulnerable women, adolescents, and children. We work in 8 African countries and the Dominican Republic. For more information about our impacts and results, please visit to patworld.org/achieve. Moving to Zambia, Achieve strengthened the Ministry of Community Development and Social Services capacity to improve social and health outcomes of the population the ministry serves in country. We choose outcome harvesting to identify and assess key system strengthening outcome. As you know, OH is a participatory evaluation proof that offers excellent flexibility to measure complex outcome where traditional quantitative methods fall short and cause and effect are non-linear. We implement OH in 2022 and 2023 to inform learning and adaptive management among the stakeholders. Next, please. In this slide, allow me to emphasize a few of our pains or like lesson learned from our experience we encountered in 2022. So all these pain are from the first year of harvesting. So by nature, OH is a flexible method to implement as a project. Activities that we embedded it into a project review workshop because of resource and time friendliness. In return, the project review aspect influence participant awareness of some outcome. Second, we let our counterpart at the ministry select the participant, and they choose like senior officials from different departments who have limited time availability. Due to their competing priorities, we cannot work through them for in-depth participation in the harvest, and their level of outcome their level or understanding of outcome OH was very limited. In OH, standardized guidelines and templates are supplementary. We didn't prepare any guidelines for facilitator. We rely on each facilitator approach to engage with the participants. That result in no consistency of data collection or engagement. Lastly, as the participant did not get the essence or boundary of organ harvesting, they have too wide degree of freedom to identify outcomes. So as a result, some harvested outcome in 2022 were beyond the scope of the project mandates. Because of these pain, we harvest limited outcome to make a compelling story. Next, please. Based on this pain, we adapt some best practices to improve the fidelity to OH and fee implementation last year. First, the ministry was part of the planning and designing team. As a result, it became the ministry activity, not only the project activity. Therefore, the ministry took more ownership and leadership role in the processing. Second, unlike 2022, we did not combine OH with other project activity. It was implemented as a standalone assessment that made no influence on participant response to outcome. Last year, we selected participants based on their roles and participation in the project intervention at a respected level, such as national, provincial, and district levels. Therefore, the participant can provide in-depth and rich information about project contribution to the system changes. We also developed simplifying question guidelines and material for facilitators and participants by using local terminology, and we even test those materials. As a result, data was collected in a consistent approach, and data quality was also improved. So, last but not least, we invest our resources to capacitate the participant on how to undertake the OH process. It's necessary to capacitate social actors, especially those who have strong quantitative skill, but may be less familiar with OH. It's pivotal to have their improved skill and experience with OH. Next, please. So all in all, we encounter both pains and gains from organ harvesting. However, pain is also gain in a way to learn experience. So with these lessons and best practices, I can say that we attain high quality data and finding for social system changes contributed by project in Zambia. Also, we are trying to share that we witnessed a tremendous interest in organ harvesting, not only in the evaluation world, but also in other health sector like health system research, where historically quantity is highly concentrated. To close my presentation, there's no doubt that OH is a flexible and customizable methodology to measure system strengthening outcome. However, it is not a panacea. Therefore, we recommend tailoring and adapting OH to meet your need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cha. Now I'll hand it over to our next presenter, Karen. Over to you.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me all right? Yeah, okay.
Yes, we
Hi,
can.
my name is Karen Biesbroek. I'm based in the Netherlands and I lead Oxfam Novib's team of MEO advisors. But this particular case dates back from my previous role when I was still a MEO advisor in a program that was using policy advocacy as an entry point towards systemic change. And we were using the methodology in monitoring. So that is different from the previous cases, but also different from the literature that we had at our disposal at the time, which led us to question ourselves as to how to go about when it comes to the substantiation step in the different steps in outcome harvesting. So we tailored it mainly to manage the risk of bias in this particular program. Next slide, please. In this particular case that I will elaborate, as you can see on the slide, it's quite big and long. And the program in itself was quite progressive, actually, in the sense that it supported civil society organizations to advocate for changes in policies and practices of both public sector actors and private sector actors. So them advocating for these changes. And of course, a program this size is always tailored to the specific political, economic contexts. And as you can imagine, that gives a whole mosaic of different value chains in all kinds of different contexts. So that was one of the challenges we had to deal with. Well, this presentation is to share some of our challenges with you, how we tailored our outcome harvesting practice to address these challenges, and what we learned from the experience, with specific attention to the substantiation step in the process. Yes, next slide. So what were our challenges? Well, some of them were more practical, perhaps, in the sense that in a program of this complexity, we needed to have some consistency and rigor in our participatory approach, because information would come in from all different corners. And so what we did was we created local ownership of periodic data collection. Outcomes were harvested by staff that were trained to harvest the material themselves, but the data were analyzed centrally for adaptive program management. So this consistency and rigor, that was really one of the challenges that we needed to address. Another challenge on a different scale was the fact that although this donor funded a really progressive type of program, the criteria it is using to assess the quality of evaluation still date from a period before they were funding programs aiming at systemic change, which meant that there's not a good fit yet as to the methodological expectations in terms of assessing the quality of the method. And that doesn't really match the nature of the program that this very ministry was funding. So we were in that transition phase. And when we started the program, the donor gave an explicit yet unfounded advice against the use of outcome harvesting for evaluation, but we used it for monitoring. And when we're using it for monitoring in a workshop setting, we wondered with these 6 steps, if you are doing the harvesting and the learning in one workshop, then how do you organize a substantiation? You cannot just pause the whole process, go out and substantiate, and then come back to analyze and learn. But one of the main things I wanted to talk to you about is this perception of the donor. It's perception of a risk of bias that is related mainly the self-importance bias, which actually is a risk in all kind of participatory processes. But these were our challenges. In the next slide, I'm explaining how we tailored outcome harvesting to address these challenges. Of course, we were adjusting outcome harvesting for its use in monitoring. So we made sure that the whole process could be led by local staff. And in order for the material to be able to be aggregated and analyzed, we developed a standard outcome harvesting statement form, which routinely asks for evidence of change and routinely asks for evidence of the contribution to that change, next to an analysis of the external actors and factors that also contributed to the change. So this was in order to minimize that risk of bias. And after long deliberations on how to go about substantiating, we decided to outsource the substantiation to the independent consultants who would be doing the midterm review and the final evaluation. Yes, so there were some certain things that we did to mitigate that risk of bias. Can we go a little bit back to still? Yeah, thank you.
2 minutes, Karen.
Okay. Yes, I think what we did with the form actually helped to mitigate the risk of self-importance bias and selection bias. The positive bias remains, however. It's really hard to motivate people to systematically document negative outcomes. And if there are many outcomes and limited time to systematically document them, then what we see is often that preference is given to the positive changes. But what did we learn on substantiation? Well, it can actually be postponed until after the analysis and learning and use. So there's no problem in outsourcing it to evaluators, especially if these evaluators are using a method similar to contribution analysis. Then the material that we collected as part of monitoring fits in seamlessly. And we also learned that in this substantiation process, despite the fact that we routinely asked for evidence, in the process of substantiation, there can still be room for differences in opinion on, how the program really contributed as opposed to the other actors and factors. So you can't rule all doubt out by collecting that evidence, but it did help. So to conclude, when adapting outcome harvesting for monitoring, we felt that the risk of bias can be reduced by simple rigor in how you build up the outcome statement by asking for additional evidence and analysis, and by having this practice of outsourcing the substantiation to independent evaluators who would be doing the evaluation anyhow. So that is what we learned back then. And after that, we continued applying the approach, now doing a better job, far better. But this was our lesson for today.
Thank you so much, Karen. So we have now some room for Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everyone, including the chat. So I open the floor. You could either put your question in the chat or raise your hand or unmute yourself. There's one question in the chat saying, who is more suitable for conducting OH in a complex program that requires various skill sets, a consultancy firm or an individual consultant? It's not directed to anyone in specific, so either of the presenters can just go ahead and.
Shall I take it?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I don't know whether this works for everyone, but the program that we applied it in was, it was mind-boggling. It was impossible for the MIO advisors in the Netherlands to be everywhere. So the best thing we did by necessity, and it worked out well, is to create local capacity to write these outcome statements with the partners who are very knowledgeable about the results. So yeah, I can talk long about it, but these are the people who know what changes happened. Yeah, so Lauren, what do you say?
I'll add that we've almost the majority, I think, except a few exceptions, have conducted this in-house, I guess, by our in-country mail team. Sorry, one of my cats has joined as well. He's very interested, guaranteed to join a webinar. We've mostly done it in-house with our local in-country mail person, where we assist from the DC office just to give guidance and whatever, and they work directly with local partners. And so it's like our in-country mail team and local partners providing the responses. And we found that works well just because they come with just such a wealth of knowledge about the program and a relationship with the partners that it allows us to gather a great deal of detail and information, but that also being internal presents a question of bias, obviously.
Thank you, Lauren. Pia, go ahead, you raised your hand.
Hi, thank you for the presentations. I'm interested a little bit in the phase after the data has been collected and kind of substantiated and analyzed, and whether there is room for adding a quantitative component after that? For example, I imagine there would be some frequencies that have been obtained on various outcomes at different levels with different engagements. So are there ways to add more rigor or perhaps test for bias through testing probability of certain outcomes or testing for gender differences and outcomes across countries? Has something like that been added perhaps to post qualitative work on outcomes? And this
Karen,
is
you wanna-
anybody who'd like to answer.
Yeah. Karen or Lauren or Cha, go ahead.
No, we haven't done anything like that. I think it's a great idea. I'd love to explore it more. I mean, the first piece you said of doing counts of like outcomes around certain themes and things of that way. We do visualize in our reports in a more quantitative way some of that, like theming and proportion of outcomes that are around these themes versus others and stuff like that. But no, we haven't done that. I guess maybe we haven't felt that we've had a big enough sample size to do that. I'm not sure if any others want to add, Karen or Cha.
Thank you.
Yeah, at Oxfam Novib, we've had the benefit, of harvesting huge quantities of outcome statement, enabling different types of analysis. And Janie, who is here, would be able to tell us more about the most recent analysis. But one I was involved in myself was large-scale content analysis, where we quantified the elements we found in the contribution section. So we counted the number of times a particular intervention strategy helped at the time to achieve a policy, not a policy change, but to enhance political will. So we were able to count, how often is something mentioned and how does that relate to our theory of change. But there are different things possible.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I think we have time for one more question and then we'll continue.
Really the last, Carmen.
Okay.
A little time.
Sirpa, go ahead. Sirpa, I see you have your hand up. You can go.
Thank you. This is Sirpa Tapaninen from Demo Finland. I'm interested in the databases. Someone said, I think it was the first speaker who referred to a database where you took the data. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because we need a database at Demo Finland for our outcomes.
Yes, we just created a simple Excel file. I don't know if this is even like, a best practice necessarily, but it at least we put everything in one place. I think before it was a lot more scattered. And so we just created an Excel database where we put like the simplified outcome statements and then some of the other data points per outcome along the columns, right? And then each row was an outcome statement. And so that helped us use qualitative analysis software for, doing coding around themes and things of that nature, or when we wanted to tally up some of the proportions of, I don't know, negative versus positive outcomes, or some of the questions we sometimes would ask a scale about contribution of PAC to the outcomes, either 4-point or 1 to 10. So we just defaulted to putting it into an Excel database, nothing really fancier than that. I don't know if Karen or Cha have other good practices to mention.
Yes, one thing I will add on at that point, Lauren, is depends on your participant and respondents. If they have a good access to internet, I would suggest you use like predefined the form that if you pick like Google Forms or Microsoft Form, please use it, because that way once they get entered the data, you will like preliminarily know how data look like. Even you don't even have to go further investigate on your data. That way it could address you throughout the process to improve data quality and management of the data. That is what I would suggest. Thank you.
Thank you, Cha. I'm mindful of time, so we'll have to continue. We have another room for Q&A after the next part of our presentation. I'm going to share screen again. And I'll hand it over to Lauren.
Thanks, everyone. I'm not sure if we can go to the next slide. So quickly, what we wanted to have you do while we're introducing this, if you could, I think I don't have the polling function, and I don't know if, Kula, if you are able to put it as a poll, but otherwise we wanted to just have people put in the chat. We wanted to hear about what your main challenges have been with the substantiation step of outcome harvesting. So what we are about to present to you is born out of the at the Q&A of this presentation that we just gave to you at the AEA conference. We had what we noticed is there were a lot of questions specifically around substantiation, around a lot of what Karen presented, and people were raising different challenges that they had faced when making determinations of how to approach substantiation for their outcome harvesting studies. And so what we thought is there would be a need, there's a need in the in our toolbox as practitioners for more guidance around this particular step of outcome harvesting. So what we want to collect, put in the chat as we go along. We again, we're developing this tool in response to needs of practitioners like you. So we want to, while we have a broader group on this call, we want to hear from you what some of your challenges are. And again, we're designing this tool as a reflection, reaction to that. So please put some of those challenges in the chat as we go along. Next slide, please. Again, I mentioned some of this tool we are presenting to you today. The purpose was, again, to add more practical guidance on what we think is one of the less understood steps of outcome harvesting. One thing we want everyone to keep in mind as part of this tool is that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to outcome harvesting as a whole, and also as for this step of the method. We also want to talk about managing expectations. So this substantiation doesn't give you something that gives you a bulletproof guarantee of unbiased data. This is still a limitation to acknowledge and be transparent about when you're conducting an outcome harvesting study. The tool that my colleagues are about to present, the format of it is, what we did is we placed it into a decision tree based on what your study or your evaluation parameters are. You would first use this decision tree and then ask yourself questions around some main decision points that we identified that include your constraints that you may have, various resource constraints, et cetera, to determine the model of substantiation to follow for your study. So I'll hand it over to, I believe, Carmen to present more on this.
Yes, thank you, Lauren. So as Lauren mentioned, the tool basically consists, as we have come up with it now, of two parts. It is meant to be used when you have finalized your SMART set of outcomes. So it's really looking at your entire set of outcomes. And then the first step would be to start with the decision tree, which serves as a guidance on your substantiation approach. And includes several parameters of your study or evaluation. And then after that, you will follow with answering the decision point questions, which include your constraints, and this will give you a substantiation model to use. So just to explain a little bit about the process we went through. So we came up with this idea of having the decision tree, and kind of had a chat about what the challenges are within substantiation and what are the questions that come up. So we aligned our discussion with what is mentioned in the book to be sure that it doesn't contradict what the book says. And we kind of figured out that there were some basic questions that you could ask, which are in the decision tree. And then there's other questions that really depend on the case. So it's really dependent on the context, on the project, the program, the intervention. So those are the decision point questions who really need to be discussed as a team. So I'm going to present you briefly the decision tree, and then I can hand it over to Karen for the decision point per case.
Carmen, it's 0.46 time-wise, 14 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. So this is the decision tree. It's a bit small, so I'll talk you briefly through it. So you start with the first question, which is on your left, which asks if the uses for the harvest require independent verification that the outcome statements described accurately enough the reality. So here you could go either into no response, which would lead to substantiation might not be necessary at the moment, or a yes response, substantiation is a solution because you're about to evaluate. And then it asks a follow-up question, which is the phase, which are the blue boxes, which is basically what type of evaluation are you envisaging. So there's also a question about if you're using OH for monitoring and you're wondering whether substantiation is necessary. So the response to this is that it might not be necessary at this moment, and you would like to decide to postpone your substantiation until you have a broader set of outcomes, or until you're really going to do an evaluation, which could be either a formative midterm or a summative end evaluation. And in that case, you can decide to substantiate. That will lead to the next question, which is in the kind of purple box in the middle, which asks, why do you want to substantiate? So there could be 3 reasons to substantiate. Well, one could be for accuracy of the data that is described in your outcome contribution or description. It could be to deepen or broaden understanding of the outcomes, or it could also be to gain more knowledge of contribution to others. And then that leaves you to the column next to it in the light green, which is about sampling. So if it's about accuracy, you could select those outcomes where there's doubt about factual information. If it's for deepen or broaden understanding, you could look at those outcomes where you want to have additional perspectives of the change and a contribution. And if you want to substantiate to gain more knowledge and contribution of outcome of others, you select those outcomes where you want to know who else contributed. This, of course, could be, you could decide to substantiate for one of those reasons or all of them. So it's not exclusive. And then we go to the blue box, which says that in case you want to substantiate to verify the accuracy of your outcomes, you could look at information you have available for your data, and then you could substantiate by looking at existing sources, which could be documents, websites, articles, etc. If you don't have that, and if you're substantiating because you want a deeper or broader understanding, it's best to engage with independent, knowledgeable people, which is also the case to if you're substantiating to gain more knowledge and contribution of others. And then finally, on the right orange boxes, it describes who could be your candidates as substantiators and how many people ideally you could ask to substantiate. So this is the tree. I'm going to go to the next slide quickly and hand it over to Karen. Which is about the follow-up questions about decision points. Karen, over to you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and then it really depends, of course, how many outcomes do you have if it is in similar. Leith, can you mute yourself? Leith? Yes, thank you. So if the number of outcomes you have is quite limited, you might as well, do substantiate everything. You need to make a decision on, which proportion of your outcomes would you like to substantiate in order to say with some confidence that the material is credible, if that is what you're aiming for. But you should also think, who should substantiate? I also heard examples where the people knowledgeable about the outcome would indicate the source of information. sorry, but the substantiator can be different types of person. That is what I wanted to say. Either the persons who were the topic of the policy, or the allies that you were working with, or another person that was knowledgeable about this change happening and how that came about. So there's also questions you need to answer to yourself, like what do I do if the various persons contacted contradict each other? What do I do with an outcome statement that was written by someone who was serious about it, and yet the sources that we contacted are saying that something else was the matter? Then what do you do with it? And so there are all kinds of decisions that you need to make. That make it interesting, but not a one-size-fits-all tool is possible. I think I'll keep it at that.
Thank you, Karen. Now I'll hand it over back to Lauren.
Thank you, Karen and Carmen. So we wanted to do a Q&A now, and obviously what we've presented is, can you click to the questions, Carmen? Sorry. We wanted to ask what clarifying questions you have about the tool we presented, and I know we presented it quickly. And also just, I'll jump ahead and just say that being mindful that we will be sharing this with the listserv of the outcome harvesting community for more formal feedback after we clean it up later this week. But we want to share this and get feedback from you practitioners. So we want to ask if you have any clarifying questions. And then the second question is, if you could also speak, this doesn't need to be in this order, but do you think that this tool may address some of the challenges that you mentioned facing substantiation? Is there anything missing? And again, both of these questions can be asked of us when we share this out formally to the listserv as well. But we wanted to open up the last minutes of the webinar to this Q&A and reactions from the group. Please just come off mute or feel free to put in the chat.
Thank you, Lauren. Any initial thoughts, feedback, comments on the tool? If there's no comment or question on the tool, I can go back to the questions we had about the presentations, but we wanted to give time to get your initial feedback on this. I see a comment from Jay who says, I like that the tool has multiple paths that aren't mutually exclusive. Thank you, Jay. That was indeed part of our conversation when designing the tool.
Exactly. And when we put it, we kept coming back to a tree. We liked the idea of a tree, decision tree, but we also didn't want it to seem as if, and that's the introductory language in the larger tool would say this, but we didn't want it to seem like you just pick one path and that this is the, this is the right way. There's just one path. There's sometimes multiple answers per question set, right? So it's just to try to lay this out into a clear visual way for the considerations for people to think of when determining substantiation approaches. So yes, thank you for noticing that. Mm-hmm.
If I could put the tool back up. So it's about the three and the decision points. I don't know if you wanted to see the three, Emily, or the other one. Marion is asking, will you share those slides with us all? Yes, we will share the slides, and actually we will share the tool as well, because we would really love people to have more time to look at more in depth, in detail, and maybe even pilot it if you're doing work that is in the steps of needing substantiation or not. So that would be great. I don't see any other questions about the tool. Maybe people are still.
There was a question from Barbara. It was before the tool was shown, but it was when you were asking for the challenges people come across in substantiation. Barbara was asking about the problem of mostly identifying outputs, as mentioned by Lauren. And she's asking whether Lauren can say a bit more about the implications of that. Were the outcomes alone enough to learn from, or were many of those outputs also important for the local groups to understand?
Thanks. Yeah, I thought I put a written response back to that, but I'm tech challenged, so maybe it didn't go. But yeah, that's a good point. I think that what we've done is we've used those as we don't discard them into the trash. I mean, we use them as sometimes we find that we need to further probe and that there actually are more outcome level results that are happening, but the partner isn't aware or able to think about them in that way. So it helps us open that up. We also, if it's at midterm, we sort of keep that list together and we remind the partner like, okay, this isn't necessarily at outcome level yet, but it looks like you're trying to achieve that in the next 2 years by the end of the project. So keep this in mind. And it can even form a jumping off point for like, you're here, you want to get here. What are we going to do? How can we help you in the next 2 years to get to that, to be able to report that higher level, like outcome result that you're aiming for? So I guess that's a bit of the way that we dealt with the capturing of outputs.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lauren. We're nearing the top of the hour. I'm mindful and respectful of everyone's time. So just to mention that any questions that haven't been responded that aren't in the chat will receive a response through email. So we'll look at that and you will get a response from us. Quickly before we close, so the next steps following this webinar is, as I mentioned, we will share the draft substantiation tool through the Outcome Harvesting Community Forum in the coming week for piloting and your comments and feedback. The whole purpose of doing this is because the tool will be presented at a solution finding session at EES and possibly also at AEA this year. So we will really want it to be for this to be a collaborative and participatory effort and obtain, the community's members' expertise on the tool. So that's it from our side. Thank you, presenters, for doing this again a second time in making the content of your presentations available for those who could not go to AEA this year. Thank you, everyone, for your engagement, participation. Thank you to Hula and Connie for the backstage support. And before you leave, I just want to remind you of our next webinar in some weeks on July 3rd. Here is the invitation on your screen. You'll get a reminder as usual, and you can also find the info on our website. Thank you so much, everyone. Glad you could join us today. Have a nice rest of your day.